Welcome to the Startup Help Desk. We are here to answer your questions about starting companies, building companies, and the meaning of life. We have a panel of experienced founders and investors to answer questions that you've submitted to us, and that's what we're here for. My name is Sean Burns. I've been a founder for about 20 years. These days, I'm an investor through Near Horizon, a firm I started recently, and I'm joined by the illustrious crew of Nick and Ash.
Hi, everyone. My name's Ash Rust, and I'm a pre-seed investor based in San Francisco. I mostly invest in B2B companies based in the US and UK through my fund, Sterling Road. And I've also worked at places like Trinity Ventures as an entrepreneur in residence and Bullpen Capital as an advisor. Before investing, I was an entrepreneur myself, most notably an early employee at the social media company Clout, as well as the co-founder and CEO of SendUp. These days, I spend most of my time coaching founders and have helped more than 1,500 startups over the years.
Hey, this is Nick Melionis. I'm co-founder and CEO of a startup called Navi. Our thesis is that the skills that make the best founders are the same skills that people and organizations need to succeed in the world of tomorrow. We build products and provide services to make that all possible. I've supported hundreds of innovators and startups throughout my time, and I'm excited, as always, to hop in today's questions.
And Nick always says that, but I always wonder if it's true. What do you think?
It's true.
This is true. Really excited,
well, actually, I had a
that?
note just to question if you've only been a founder for 20 years. Is that in dog years?
Oh, man. Yeah.
That's good
I got
stuff.
started back when the earth was young and Aristotle
When it was
the leading
flat.
venture capitalist. Oh, yeah, that's true. That's true. So today we're here to answer questions about breaking out. Specifically, what do you do when your company starts to stall out, your growth isn't happening, or things aren't clicking like they used to? You were doing well and now you're not doing as well anymore. How do you break out of that? How do you get back on a growth track? Is it even possible? All of our questions are about breaking out. And they were all submitted on our website, thestartuphelpdesk.com, or on Twitter/X at thestartuphd. So if you have questions, we would love to answer them in a future episode. Head over there and submit those questions. We will answer them. But for now, let's talk about some questions that were about breaking out. So guys, here we go. First one. Our quarterly sales have been consistent for the past few years, not going down, but not getting larger. As a result, our growth is consistent, but going down on a percentage basis. How can we break out and do more? It's a great question. That's where I stole the breakout title for today's episode. Nick, what do you think, man?
Yeah, this is awesome. There's a lot packed into this one. I always like to think about this around just the building blocks of growth for your business. So much of this question hinges upon how do we find that next channel of growth? And to start, you got to make sure that your building blocks are in a great spot. I look at those building blocks as the following. One is, do you predictably know who your customer is? And so can you repeatedly identify some specifics about who your target customer is? If so, fantastic. Second building block is, do you have proof that this is working? Do you have case studies, articles, other marketable assets that are this engine for marketing and sales? And the third piece of it is, do you make it easy to expand your existing business? Is it easy for the existing business to expand within an existing customer? And is it easy to get referrals? I like to start there and just investigate and figure out, do we have those things right? If so, we can start creatively finding other breakout channels, so to speak, but you really can't unless you have those dialed in. That's my first read on this. Ash, what's your take?
So this is probably the question that founders in my portfolio ask me about the most. They see some kind of plateau at various different stages in their sales. And my response is usually to do a sales funnel analysis. So we're going to look at it from distribution down to customer success and just ask questions. Are we doing enough initial calls or getting enough initial signups? If you're talking about enterprise sales, I like to think about 40 new first calls with potential customers per month as a good starting baseline. Next, are enough of the people that we're talking to or signing up getting excited and engaging with the product? Do they like it a lot? That needs to be at least 10 to 20% of people that are really excited about the idea, really want to use it if you give them self-serve sign up. And then of those people who do get excited, who go into that engagement process, how many of them are becoming paying customers after they've had a chance to try it out? I usually like to think about 30% of trials going your way, becoming paying customers. And if you're not seeing those kinds of numbers, we want to be looking for where those choke points occur, because those are going to be the easiest places to improve. Can we do better on distribution? Maybe we can change our messaging, or maybe the product needs work, or we need to offer different features. Are we doing a good job of pushing people who are using the product to buy when they're at that point of maximum excitement? And oftentimes there's usually some very obvious places where there's low-hanging fruit, and that's how you change your current growth trajectory.
Well, I'd like to point out, at the very least, if your sales are not declining, that's good because people are buying. Because if sales go to zero, then you have all sorts of other problems. But I'm curious, Ash and Nick, like when this does happen, when sales kind of flatten out, you can turn it around. You can probably start growing again. But how often does that then turn into the kind of venture backable growth that investors are looking for? Like how often, or have you ever seen it even happen where a company that's kind of stalled out in this way finds that extra, booster rocket and takes off?
Well, it's going on a lot right now in the AI world for sure. So there was a lot of companies that I invested in maybe 3 or 4 years ago that have found their feet as a result of the last 18 months of AI market trends, for sure. So definitely a recent example of that. And I'd say that especially at the early stages, people tend to stall out in the 1 to 3 customers range, 100K ARR, 500K ARR, 1 million ARR. And very often they're going to have to change something significant in order to reach the next level. And we do see that a lot. It takes a lot of time and a lot of hard work and usually some layoffs, but it definitely happens on a regular basis within our portfolio.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, I would actually agree. I asked the question, but like I've seen quite often that if people are buying, that means people want it. The question is, can you make sure, I like the choke point analogy, can you make sure that there is no barrier for them, if they want it, to get it? And if you remove those, it's a little bit like a river. You remove the dams, all of a sudden it starts flowing faster and faster, and things can kick off. But it certainly doesn't hurt to have a huge wave like AI come and pick you up and lift you over those barriers as well. That's never a bad thing.
Nothing quite like demand.
You know what? We need t-shirts that say that. That is fantastic. If you learn nothing else from this podcast, that's what you learn.
That's a great place to start.
Deep insights, folks.
Oh, man. Oh, okay. Nick, what else do we have? What other ways we need to help people try to break out of their funk and have their business refine that growth engine?
Yeah, let's do it. Here's a question we got from a founder. They asked, we have one other competitor that sells an almost identical product, and every sale is a head-to-head competition. We spend all of our time focused on them, but neither side is winning. How do we get past this deadlock? Ash, do you want to hop in there?
Yeah, I'll be honest and say I don't have a lot of sympathy for this situation. I think that if you are listening to your customers, it's likely that both of these products fail in some fairly significant ways for your customer profile. And hopefully it fails in some significant way for a niche subset of your customers, and you can maybe turn to focus on them and then move those customers over to you at perhaps the expense of others, but giving yourself an island in an area of competitive differentiation. I just wouldn't be afraid to take risks and test new ideas and features, because obviously, if you always keep doing the same thing, you're putting yourself at great risk of your competitor finding some innovation point and then whooping your tail. So I would spend a lot less time talking about the competitor and more time talking about how you want the world to look and where your product is going to improve to change that. Seeking parity with some other company is what turned BlackBerry from a global force in cell phones into what is now a lowly patent troll. If you want to build the iPhone and become the global phenomenon that it is, that's not going to come from talking about the competition.
Yeah, a lot of people get focused on the competition. This whole situation, by the way, happened to me in the early days of Flurry. There were 2 major mobile analytics companies. There was Flurry Analytics and there was Pinch Media. And we did spend a lot of time in knife fights competing, and we ended up merging. I mean, we kind of acquired Pinch Media, but we combined the entities and we no longer had to compete. And it made sense because there was only 2 companies leading the market. It was a huge market. And by wrapping together, instead of competing, we had 90-something% market share, and we could run the table. And it was a great move. So it is not uncommon that if you are two companies in knife fights over deals, it's a big market, there's two leaders, that combining entities might actually make a lot of sense, because then all of a sudden you don't waste time competing, you just waste time winning. But I do agree with Ash, which is that you can't win this kind of situation. If you're not going to merge, if you're going to compete, you don't win if the rules stay the same. You have to shake it up. Something radical has to change. You can't be afforded to take a lot of big risks. It isn't a war of attrition, because essentially what ends up happening is, even if you beat the competitor and they fail, they probably will take you down with them as they fail. They will do all sorts of weird pricing wars. They'll sell below cost. And in doing so, they'll damage your business and everybody loses. So change it up, change the product, change the business model, change something radically. Do not just keep playing the game and hopeful that you can squeak out a victory slowly over time. It just doesn't work that way. You never have enough time in that kind of environment.
I like this. And here's the synopsis that I've gotten from this. Let me know if this is hitting for you. So it's more time talking to customers, less time talking about competition. There's this element of you can pursue a merger and there are opportunities that can make sense. But if not a merger, and this is something that's just a key aspect of your startup in general, it's so important to have a distinct opinion about the world and make sure that you are hard charging towards that in order to distinguish yourself. So not distinguishing based off of your competitor, but distinguishing about really your ethos about this opportunity for the world. Seems what you both are marching on here.
And even if you want to merge, you want to be the kind of bigger fish in that pond. And so you still want to beat them in the short term to make the merger favorable to you rather than vice versa. So generally speaking, shake things up.
So crush them first and then merge with them.
That's great.
There you go. There you go. I'm not a titan of industry. I'm not able to do these sorts of fancy things, but it is amazing to me how I've seen that. When it happened to me at Flurry, is the first time I'd ever been through it. But since then, I've seen it happen repeatedly in more markets, so enough to believe that it's a common pattern that arises. There's two companies dominating a market, and they end up merging. Is that 1 + 1 = 3? But be careful, because we had a previous episode about mergers. We're like, not a good idea. That's still true.
Yeah, it doesn't work out for most people.
No, in rare circumstances, maybe. Okay,
all right, maybe
cool.
we got
Ash,
time for one more question.
Yeah, let's hit it.
Last question is, we're in a very crowded market, and while we're growing well, it's hard to stand out in such a big crowd. How do we break out of the pack? Sean.
Let me jump in and just say, is this not true of every AI company on planet Earth right now? It's like,
you better hope your algorithm's way better. But even if it is, someone's going to be like, let me compare it to 8 other algorithms very similar to yours, including all the 17 open source ones that are available on Hugging Face. Best of luck. Yeah, exactly. It's definitely going to be... This idea of some universal AGI is hilarious when we don't even have in America the best open source model yet. In the US, we're already losing. Be serious.
I at one point, obviously, I spent a lot of my career in data. At one point, I was counting the number of startups who were pitching me to use LLMs to replace SQL in database queries. So you could write natural language queries, and the LLM would translate it into SQL and query your database for you. And I started counting, and at one point, I realized I was literally getting 7 of those pitches a week. It was just massive. It was just everybody. Anyway, so you're in a big pack. How do you break out of it? First thing you do, don't try to use LLMs to replace SQL, because everybody's doing it. My first lesson is almost every market has competitors. All of them might not be as super crowded, but I don't think the rules change. You do not win as a challenger by playing the same game. You have to change the rules somehow. Maybe you change the rules in the product, maybe in the business model. Something has to change, because if you don't change the game, the incumbents or whoever's there first has the advantage. So change the game somehow. Make sure you're shaking it up. And even in a big pack, what you'll find is the large competitive markets, a lot of people gravitate towards the same kind of things. They gravitate towards the same pricing or the same kind of product experience. My last company, Outlier, was in BI, and BI is very crowded. And so we launched what I think was the first BI product that had no dashboards, because everybody thought BI products equal dashboards. And so here we were, a company in business intelligence that had no dashboards, and it kind of shook things up, and people were like, what is that? And it allowed us to stand out. And so make sure you're changing the game. Also, figure out where the market's going, right? Is the market going to shift in interesting ways that everybody else is not seeing? Can you get ahead of it? Or is the market going to be in the same kind of situation, stagnant, lots of competition, and maybe you should find a new market? Because inevitably, even if you win, if there's hordes of these zombie companies nipping at you, it can be hard to create breakaway growth because they just constantly nip at you and make it harder for you to pull away and grow in the way you want. Nick, what do you think, man? I mean, I don't want to say crypto is a crowded market, but I will say this: there are probably a few markets that were more crowded. What do you think?
Yeah, I love the crypto shout out here because this also dates back to my first startup, which was a Bitcoin company. And
1975.
That's right. It's been a good minute for sure. But there's something that has rung true since then, and I've carried with into Navi as well, which is if there is a real opportunity, number one, there's a lot of people flocking to it. And so you will always face competition in some way. That being said, the heart of your business really is what people refer to as a strategic narrative. It is your perspective on the world and the tectonic shift shaping it, and how your company, your product, etc., is the vessel that helps somebody capitalize on this shifting world. When you frame your business in that way, you are no longer considering the pack. You are no longer considering your features and how you distinguish yourself from the competition. Instead, you are saying there's some fundamental shift that is shaping the world. As a result, there's new value that folks can be able to capitalize on. Those that are not aware of that miss out. Those that are aware of it are able to deliver some amazing value. And we are a vessel that helps you succeed in this changing world. If you consider that kind of framing, I think that allows you to stand out, so to speak, because you're just playing the game differently and you're building a narrative that helps you stand on a different platform, so to speak.
Okay, also, but both of you said that any good market is going to have competition. So how do we know if it's got too much competition to bother going into, or we need to change the rules?
That's a good question. So Ash, how do you know when you look into investment if a market is too crowded or not?
I'm sorry. Ash isn't available today. Please leave a message.
Oh, that's good. Sean, I'm hoping you got an answer for this one. I do not like the start of this one. This is a tricky one.
So I think you want to have, zero competition is typically bad. I think we can agree. If we haven't covered that in a previous episode, we should in the future. I think about crowded markets where there are enough competitors that your customers can't keep them straight, that they are essentially starting to have trouble keeping track of who is who. And it's easy to find out because if you get on the phone with a customer and you ask them who else they might have talked to, who else they might have considered, if they start rattling off a bunch of names or they're getting confused by it, it means that there's lots of people creating a lot of noise in that market. It's okay to have a handful of competitors because it's easy to keep those in their mind. But once it gets to be such a long list that it all blurs together, I think that, for me, that's when it gets too crowded.
So if they're calling you Jerry, that's when you know.
It depends. If they're calling me Jerry in order to sign a contract, I am Jerry. Absolutely. Nice to meet you.
I'm the best Jerry you ever met. Sign.
Which actually did happen to me once. I had a customer who called me Seth instead of Sean. And I was not going to argue with them as long as things were progressing. It gets awkward when you get to the signature phase and you're like, hey, my name is Sean, not Seth.
Oh, that's good. You started, CC your own email address. I'm going to introduce you to Sean real quick to carry this to the finish line.
Well, you'd wonder about that because my email address would have my name in it, but somehow it just didn't click. But that's Ash, amazing. Now that I've said, what you're an investor, you look at a lot more deals than we look at. What do you look at in the market to decide if it's too crowded to invest in?
Well, ordinarily, because I'm at the formation stage, I would be looking at your customer discovery. And so how many conversations you manage to have, i.e. were people even willing to talk about this problem? Is it still a big enough problem for people to give up their time to discuss? And then is a reasonable percentage, maybe 10 to 20% of those people that you're talking to, in desperate need of some new solution such that they're willing to keep talking to you about it? That would be the first baseline of like whether or not there's an opportunity in a market. That does not mean the market can be mature or immature. It doesn't really matter. It's just whether or not there's room in for the customers based on their current level of satisfaction and budget.
Gotcha. So it doesn't matter about how crowded the market is. If the crowded market isn't servicing the customer needs, it doesn't matter then.
Correct, yes. But at the same time, I would also have a different barometer for people that do or don't have some kind of technical advantage they could potentially build or planning to build. Because if you're in a crowded market that isn't serving customers and the startup can serve customers, obviously everyone's going to just copy you if you don't have a differentiator that is defensible.
Agreed. Actually, the phone market is a good example of that. There was no market more crowded than the phone market when Apple blew it up with the iPhone. And years later, it remains a good example of how you can enter a crowded market and just turn it to your advantage. Look at that. Our whole episode comes full circle. We're even reusing our metaphors. Man, that's amazing. Look at that. Just
you're going to get nominated for some kind of podcast award, Sean, for that kind of poetry.
Well, the good news is the podcast industry isn't crowded. There's not a lot of podcasts. Everybody listening, this is the only podcast they listen to. And let me tell you, we greatly appreciate that by trusting us.
I've certainly heard that from my grandparents.
Oh, guys, we're out of time. We've covered a lot about helping companies break out. Hopefully, if you're in this situation with your company, this has helped. Good luck in breaking out of it. I can tell you I've been there a few times. It's never easy, but necessary work. As always, Ash and Nick, thank you for the honest truth.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Yeah, thank you both. Absolute blast.
And if you have questions that you'd like us to answer in a future episode, please find us on thestartuphelpdesk.com or on X/Twitter at thestartuphd. We would love to answer your questions because the more questions we get, the more episodes we have. And as you can tell, Ash and Nick love hearing my jokes, and so do it for them, not for me.
My favorite.
Okay, the Startup Help Desk is now closed. We will be back. In the meantime, good luck in building your business.